The sun cast long shadows over Whisper Creek, Wyoming, in the summer of 1879 when Abigail Novak stepped off the dusty stagecoach, her face streaked with tears, and her once fine dress bearing the stains of a 1,000-mile journey. She clutched a crumpled letter in one hand and a small leather satchel in the other, all that remained of her former life in Boston. The small frontier town sprawled before her, nothing like the grand city she'd fled. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint peeling under the relentless western sun. Men in dust-covered clothes paused to stare at the newcomer, and Abigail felt herself shrinking beneath their curious gazes. "Madam, you need help with that bag." The stagecoach driver set her trunk down beside her. "No, thank you, I can manage," she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she could. Manage the bag, perhaps, manage her new life, that remained to be seen. She had come west after her father's banking business collapsed, leaving behind mountains of debt and a ruined reputation. Her fiancé had promptly dissolved their engagement when her family's fortunes turned, revealing the shallow nature of his affections. With no prospects and nowhere else to turn, Abigail had answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher in Whisper Creek. As she stood uncertain in the street, a commotion drew her attention to the saloon across the way. The batwing doors burst open, and a man staggered backward into the street, followed by another who looked ready to continue whatever altercation had begun inside. "I won't tell you again, Zachary. Pay what you owe or don't come back," shouted the man from the doorway. The man called Zachary straightened his hat and brushed dust from his worn leather vest. "Your whiskey ain't worth half what you charge, Mortimer, and you know it." He turned away with a casual grace that belied the tension of the moment, and his eyes met Abigail's across the street. Something in his gaze, a mixture of surprise and interest, made her look away quickly. "You must be the new schoolteacher," came a female voice beside her. Abigail turned to find a woman in her 40s, dressed plainly but neatly. "I'm Martha Wilson. I run the boarding house where you'll be staying." "The school board asked me to meet you." "Yes, I'm Abigail Novak. Thank you for coming to greet me," Martha smiled warmly. "Let's get you settled in. You look like you've had a long journey." As they walked, Abigail felt eyes following her, specifically the eyes of the man from the saloon. She risked a glance back and found him still watching, leaning against a hitching post with an ease that suggested he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. "Who is that man?" she asked Martha. "Zachary Xavier. He's got a small ranch outside of town. Keeps to himself mostly, except when he comes in for supplies or a drink. Some trouble in his past, they say, but he's decent enough. Helps out when needed." Martha's boarding house turned out to be a 2-story building with fresh white paint and blue shutters, a small oasis of civilization in the rugged town. Inside, the parlor was neat and furnished with a mix of practical Western pieces and a few Eastern touches that made Abigail feel slightly less out of place. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Martha said. "Supper's at 6. The other boarders are the telegraph operator, Mr. Peterson, and Dr. Wilson, my husband." Abigail's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small desk beneath the window. She placed her satchel on the bed and moved to look out at the town that would be her home now. From this vantage point, she could see the main street stretching out toward the mountains in the distance. The vastness of the landscape was overwhelming after the crowded streets of Boston. She unpacked her few belongings, some books, clothing, a small portrait of her parents in happier times, and a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother. The trunk with the rest of her possessions would arrive on the next freight wagon in a week. That evening, Abigail met the other boarders over a hearty meal of stew and cornbread. Dr. Wilson was a kindly man with a thoughtful manner, while Mr. Peterson proved to be a talkative fellow with news of every settlement within 50 miles. "The school's been without a teacher since Miss Holloway left to get married this past spring," Dr. Wilson explained. "The children have been running wild, and the town council was mighty relieved when you answered the advertisement." "I hope I can meet their expectations," Abigail said, doubt creeping into her voice. You've got proper credentials from back east, Martha reassured her. That's more than most frontier teachers can claim. The next morning, Abigail met with the town council in the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. The building was weathered but sound, with rows of crude desks facing a blackboard and the teacher's desk. The council members, the mayor, the general store owner, and a local rancher outlined her duties and the expectations for the town's 15 school-age children. Classes begin Monday next, Mayor Simmons told her. That'll give you a few days to prepare and settle in. As she walked back toward the boarding house, Abigail was lost in thought, planning lessons and wondering how she would manage children who had been without formal education for months. She didn't notice the rider approaching until his horse snorted nearby, startling her. "Miss Novak, isn't it?" It was Zachary Xavier, looking considerably less rumpled than he had the previous day. His dark hair was neatly combed beneath his hat, and his clothes, though worn, were clean. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Yes." "Mr. Xavier, correct," she replied, maintaining her composure despite her surprise. He tipped his hat. "Just wanted to welcome you properly to Whisper Creek. It's not often we get new folks from back east, especially ones bringing learning with them." "Thank you." "It's quite different from Boston, but I'm sure I'll adjust." "Most do if they give it time." He shifted in his saddle. "I hear you're starting up the school again. My foreman's boy will be one of your students, Tim Garrett. Bright kid, but he's been running a bit wild since the last teacher left." "I'll look forward to meeting him," Abigail said politely, though the prospect of taming wild Western children was becoming increasingly daunting. "He's got a good heart, just needs some direction." Zachary paused, then added, "Like most of us out here." There was something about the way he looked at her, not with the crude appraisal she'd received from some men in town, but with a genuine interest that was both flattering and unsettling. "I should continue my preparations," she said, breaking the moment. "Of course. Good day, Miss Novak." He tipped his hat again and rode on, leaving Abigail with the distinct impression that their paths would cross again soon. The following days passed in a flurry of activity as Abigail cleaned the schoolhouse, organized textbooks, and prepared lessons. Martha introduced her to other townspeople, and slowly, Whisper Creek began to feel less foreign. On Sunday, she attended services at the small white church, where she met many of her future students and their parents. The minister, Reverend Daniels, made a special point of introducing her to the congregation, which left her blushing under the scrutiny of so many eyes. After the service, as people lingered to socialize, Abigail noticed Zachary Xavier standing apart from the others, speaking with a young boy who appeared to be around 10 years old. When they saw her looking their way, Zachary nudged the boy forward. "Miss Novak, this is Tim Garrett, the boy I mentioned," Zachary said. Tim shuffled his feet but looked up at her with clear, intelligent eyes. "Pleased to meet you, madam." "I'm very pleased to meet you too, Tim," Abigail replied warmly. "Are you looking forward to school tomorrow?" "Yes, I guess so. Mr. Xavier says learning's important if I want to make something of myself." Zachary placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Tim's been helping at the ranch since his pa took ill last winter. He's got a good head for numbers." "Then I'll be sure to challenge him appropriately," Abigail said, smiling at the boy. To Zachary, she added, "It's good of you to take an interest in his education." "Well, someone has to look out for these youngsters," he replied. "Jim Garrett's been my foreman for years. When he got laid up, taking Tim under my wing seemed the natural thing to do." There was a depth to Zachary Xavier that belied her first impression of him as merely another rough cowboy. As they parted ways, Abigail found herself curious to know more about him. The first day of school arrived, and with it came 15 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. They filed into the schoolhouse with varying degrees of enthusiasm, eyeing their new teacher with undisguised curiosity. Abigail had dressed carefully in her most professional attire, a high-necked blue dress with her hair pinned neatly beneath a small cap. She stood tall behind her desk, determined to make a good impression. "Good morning, children. I'm Miss Novak, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. We'll begin by learning a bit about each other. The morning progressed better than she had feared. Most of the children were eager to learn, though a few of the older boys seemed determined to test her patience with whispers and small disruptions. Tim Garrett, however, proved to be as bright as Zachary had claimed, answering questions thoughtfully and helping younger students with their letters. By midday, when she rang the bell for the lunch recess, Abigail felt cautiously optimistic. The children scattered to eat their packed meals in the schoolyard, and she sat at her desk to review the afternoon's lessons. A shadow fell across her papers, and she looked up to find Zachary Xavier standing in the doorway, holding what appeared to be a small parcel. "Mr. Xavier, this is a surprise." He stepped inside, removing his hat. "Thought you might appreciate some lunch. Martha mentioned you forgot yours in the rush this morning." Sure enough, the parcel contained a napkin-wrapped sandwich and an apple. Abigail realized she was indeed hungry, having been too nervous to eat breakfast. "That's very thoughtful, thank you. How's the first day going?" he asked, glancing around the schoolroom. "Better than I expected. Your young friend Tim is quite a help." Zachary smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weather-worn face. "He's a good kid. His pa would be proud to see him taking to his studies." "Would be, is Mr. Garrett?" "No, he's still with us, but the fever left him pretty weak. He can't work like he used to." Zachary's expression darkened. "That's why I've been looking after Tim. A boy needs guidance." There was something in the way he said it that suggested personal experience. Before Abigail could inquire further, the door burst open and one of the older boys rushed in. Miss Novak. Susie Henderson fell and cut her knee, something awful. Abigail jumped to her feet, but Zachary was already moving. "I'll help, got some experience with cuts and scrapes." Outside, they found a small crowd gathered around 8-year-old Susie, who sat sobbing on the ground, blood seeping through her torn stocking. Zachary knelt beside her with a gentleness that surprised Abigail. "Let's have a look, little lady," he said, carefully examining the cut. "It's not as bad as it looks. Miss Novak, do you have clean water and bandages in the schoolhouse?" "Yes, in my desk drawer." While Abigail fetched the supplies, Zachary kept Susie distracted with a story about a brave little Mustang he'd once tamed. His ease with the child was remarkable for a man who seemed otherwise so solitary. Together, they cleaned and bandaged Susie's knee, and by the time the lunch recess ended, the girl was smiling again, proud of her battle wound, as Zachary called it. As the children filed back inside, Zachary lingered in the schoolyard with Abigail. "You handled that well," she told him. He shrugged. "Out here, everyone learns to deal with injuries. Doctors aren't always nearby. Still, you have a way with children. I wouldn't have expected that." "There's a lot about me you wouldn't expect, Miss Novak." There was a hint of challenge in his voice. "Perhaps you'll give me the chance to surprise you again sometime." Before she could respond, he replaced his hat and strode toward his horse tethered nearby. "Enjoy your sandwich," he called over his shoulder. Abigail returned to the schoolhouse, oddly flustered by the encounter. Zachary Xavier was unlike any man she had met in Boston, direct yet enigmatic, rough yet gentle when the situation called for it. He defied easy categorization, and that made him both intriguing and unsettling. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. School days were filled with lessons, while evenings were spent grading papers and preparing for the next day. Abigail found herself settling into life in Whisper Creek more easily than she had anticipated. The townspeople were welcoming, if curious about their Eastern schoolteacher, and the children responded well to her firm but kind approach. Zachary appeared at the schoolhouse periodically, sometimes dropping off Tim when the boy's father was having a particularly difficult day, other times bringing small gifts, wildflowers for her desk. A particularly interesting rock formation he thought might help with her geology lesson, or fresh vegetables from his garden. Each visit left Abigail more curious about the rancher. He clearly valued education, spoke with more refinement than many of the local men, and displayed a knowledge of literature that surprised her when he recognized a passage from Emerson she had written on the blackboard. When she commented on it, he merely smiled. A man can educate himself, Miss Novak, even without the benefit of fancy Eastern schools. One Saturday morning in early October, Abigail was shopping at the general store when she overheard a conversation between two women she recognized as mothers of her students. Can't imagine what Zachary Xavier sees in her. She's nothing but a prim Easterner who wouldn't last a day on a real ranch. Well, you know his history. After what happened with Sarah Wilkins, it's no wonder he'd set his sights on someone from outside Whisper Creek. Still, she's hardly his type, too educated, too refined. A man like that needs a woman who understands the hardships of Western life. Abigail pretended to be absorbed in examining bolts of fabric while her cheeks burned. Were people really speculating about her and Zachary, and who was Sarah Wilkins? That afternoon, unable to focus on her lesson plans, Abigail decided to take a walk by the creek that gave the town its name. The cottonwood trees were turning golden, their leaves rustling in the autumn breeze. She found a flat rock by the water's edge and sat, watching the clear water rush over the stones. "Penny for your thoughts, Miss Novak," she started at Zachary's voice. He stood a few feet away, leading his horse by the reins. "Mr. Xavier, you have a habit of appearing unexpectedly." "Just Zachary, please. After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities." He tied his horse to a nearby branch and sat beside her on the rock, leaving a respectable distance between them. "You seem troubled." Abigail hesitated, then decided directness was best. "I overheard some talk in town today about you and, well, about us." Zachary's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "Gossip is Whisper Creek's favorite pastime. I pay it little mind. They mentioned someone named Sarah Wilkins." Now his face darkened and he turned to look at the creek. "Did they now? I'm sorry, it's none of my business." "No, it's fair you should ask." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. "Sarah was the daughter of a neighboring rancher. We were engaged to be married 3 years ago. What happened? She died. Influenza swept through the county that winter, hit the Wilkins family hard." His voice was flat, but Abigail could sense the pain beneath the words. "By the time I got word and reached their ranch, she was already gone. Her father and 2 brothers too. I'm so sorry." Abigail resisted the urge to place her hand on his arm. "After that, I kept to myself mostly, focused on the ranch. People eventually stopped trying to match me up with every available woman in the territory." He glanced at her with a wry smile. "Until you came along, me, but I've done nothing to encourage such talk. You don't have to. You're new, you're beautiful, and you're unmarried. That's enough to set tongues wagging. The fact that I bring you vegetables from my garden might have contributed a bit too. Beautiful." The casual way he said the word made Abigail's breath catch. In Boston, men had called her handsome or accomplished, but beautiful? Never that. "I don't want to be the cause of uncomfortable rumors for you," she said carefully. "Is that what's troubling you, the gossip?" Zachary turned to face her fully. "Or is it something else? I don't know what you mean. I think you do." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I think what troubles you is that you're starting to care what people say because you're starting to care about me, and that wasn't in your plans when you came west." The directness of his assessment left her speechless. He was right, of course. Over the past weeks, Zachary Xavier had become far more than just another townsperson to her. His visits to the schoolhouse had become highlights of her days, and she found herself thinking of him at odd moments, wondering what he would say about a particular book she was reading, or how he would approach a problem with a difficult student. "You're very presumptuous, Mr. Xavier," she finally managed, falling back on formality as a shield. He smiled, not the least bit deterred. "Part of surviving out here is reading situations clearly, and I've been reading you pretty clearly since the day you arrived, Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Then you know I came here to teach, not to find a husband," he finished for her. "I don't recall proposing marriage. At least not yet." The yet hung between them, full of possibilities that both frightened and thrilled her. "I should get back to town," she said, standing abruptly. "I have lessons to prepare." Zachary rose as well but made no move to follow as she started up the path. Abigail, he called after her. The Harvest Festival is next Saturday. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me? She paused, her back still to him. The proper thing would be to decline, to maintain the professional distance befitting a teacher. But the thought of spending an evening with him, away from the schoolhouse and the watching eyes of children, was too tempting to resist. Yes, she said simply, then continued up the path without looking back. The week leading up to the Harvest Festival was the longest of Abigail's life. She tried to focus on her teaching, but thoughts of Zachary intruded constantly. What was she doing? Getting involved with anyone wasn't part of her plan, especially not a rancher in this remote western town. She had come to Whisper Creek to rebuild her life, to establish herself as an independent woman after the collapse of her family's fortune. And yet, there was something about Zachary Xavier that called to her. His quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way he moved through the world with confidence but without arrogance. He was unlike the polished, ambitious men she had known in Boston, men like Harold Pemberton, her former fiancé, who had abandoned her at the first sign of financial trouble. The morning of the festival dawned clear and cool. Abigail spent an inordinate amount of time choosing her outfit, finally settling on a deep green dress with modest lace trim, her one remaining piece of finery from her previous life. Martha noticed her care as she descended the stairs that evening. "My, don't you look lovely? Special occasion, just the festival," Abigail replied, feeling her cheeks warm. And would a certain rancher have anything to do with that blush? Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. Before Abigail could respond, a knock came at the door. Martha opened it to reveal Zachary, dressed in what was clearly his best shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "Evening, Mrs. Wilson. I've come to escort Miss Novak to the festival." "So I see," Martha's smile was knowing, "you two have a wonderful time." "Don't keep her out too late, Zachary. She has a reputation to maintain." "Yes, madam," he replied seriously, though his eyes danced with amusement. The town square had been transformed for the festival, with lanterns hanging from ropes strung between buildings, tables laden with food, and a cleared area for dancing. A small band played lively tunes, and already couples were spinning across the makeshift dance floor. "The whole town turns out for Harvest Festival," Zachary explained as they walked among the festivities. "Best food you'll taste all year, and the only time old Judge Fletcher lets anyone see him smile." True to his word, the food was exceptional. Martha's famous apple pie, Mrs. Johnson's fried chicken, and contributions from every household in Whisper Creek. Abigail found herself relaxing as the evening progressed, laughing at Zachary's stories and greeting her students and their parents. "Will you dance, Miss Novak?" Tim Garrett appeared beside their table, looking uncommonly neat in a clean shirt, his hair slicked down with water. "I'd be delighted, Tim," she replied, charmed by the boy's earnest request. As Tim led her somewhat awkwardly through a simple reel, she caught sight of Zachary watching them, a smile playing at his lips. When the dance ended, he stepped forward. "My turn, I believe," he said to Tim, who relinquished her hand with a theatrical bow. Zachary's hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her into a waltz. He moved with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback, and Abigail found herself following his lead effortlessly. "You dance well for a cowboy," she teased. "And you dance well for a schoolteacher," he returned, "though I suspect you've had considerably more practice in grand ballrooms than I have." "Once upon a time," she admitted, "though that seems like another life now. Do you miss it?" His question was gentle, but his eyes searched hers intently. Abigail considered before answering. "I miss certain things, music, art, the libraries, but I don't miss the shallowness of it all. When my father's business failed, it was as if I became invisible to the people I'd known all my life." "Their loss," Zachary said simply. "Out here, people judge you by what you do, not what you have." "Is that why you came west?" she asked, realizing she knew little of his past before Whisper Creek. A shadow crossed his face. "Partly. I left Philadelphia after my father died. He was a professor at the university there, literature and philosophy. My mother had passed years before, and there was nothing keeping me. I wanted open spaces, room to breathe. You were educated there. This explained his knowledge of literature, his occasional use of more formal language. Until I was 18. Then I decided books weren't enough. I wanted to live, not just read about living. The music slowed, and he drew her slightly closer. What about you, Abigail? What really brought you to Whisper Creek? The question was asked so directly, with such genuine interest, that Abigail found herself telling him everything: her father's failed investments, the debts that consumed their family home, her fiancé's swift departure when her dowry evaporated, and her desperate need to find a place where she could support herself honorably. So you see, I'm not the refined Boston lady everyone assumes. I'm just a woman trying to survive. The music ended, but Zachary continued holding her hand. Let's walk, he suggested, leading her away from the crowded dance floor toward the quieter edge of the square. The night air had grown cooler, and without asking, Zachary removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The weight of it was comforting, and it carried his scent: leather and pine and something uniquely him. Thank you for telling me your story, he said as they walked. It can't have been easy, leaving everything you knew. It wasn't, but in some ways it was a relief. The life I had, the life I was expected to have, it was like wearing a costume that never quite fit. Out here. She gestured at the vast darkness beyond the town, the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Out here, I feel like I can breathe too. They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. Zachary stopped, turning to face her. In the dim light spilling from the distant lanterns, his expression was serious. Abigail, I need to tell you something. The day you arrived in Whisper Creek, I was at the lowest point I'd been in years. The drought last summer nearly ruined me. I was in debt to half the merchants in town. I'd started to think that maybe I should sell the ranch, move on. What changed? You did. He took her hands in his. Seeing you step off that stagecoach looking so lost but so determined, it reminded me why I came out here in the first place, to build something real, something that mattered. His words warmed her more than his jacket ever could. Zachary, let me finish. I know you came here to be independent, to make your own way. I respect that more than you know, but I also know that what's growing between us is something rare. At least it is for me. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't what she had planned. She had come west to escape the pain of betrayal, to prove she could survive on her own. Getting involved with a rancher, no matter how compelling he might be, wasn't part of that plan. I can't, she whispered, pulling her hands away. I came here to start over, to stand on my own. I can't risk depending on someone else again. I can't risk having my heart broken when the next drought comes, or when you decide a schoolteacher isn't enough. Is that what you think? That I'd abandon you at the first sign of trouble? Hurt flashed in his eyes. It's what men do. It's what Harold did. I'm not Harold. Zachary's voice was low, intense, and I think you know that. She did know it, somewhere deep in her heart. Zachary Xavier was nothing like the men she had known in Boston, but fear, the raw, terrible fear of being vulnerable again, kept her frozen in place. I need time, she finally said. This is all happening so fast. I understand. He stepped back, giving her space. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They returned to the festival, maintaining a polite distance, but Abigail was acutely aware of Zachary's presence beside her, of the unsaid words hanging between them. When he escorted her back to the boarding house, he simply tipped his hat and wished her good night, leaving her with a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. The following weeks were difficult. Abigail threw herself into her teaching, expanding the curriculum to include more advanced subjects for the older students, and organizing a small library with books donated by townspeople. Zachary kept his distance, respecting her request for time, though she occasionally caught him watching her from across the street or when he dropped Tim off at school. November brought the first snowfall, transforming Whisper Creek into a winter wonderland that reminded Abigail painfully of New England Christmases from her childhood. As the holiday approached, the town began preparations for a Christmas pageant to be held at the schoolhouse. Abigail was busy organizing the children's performances when Martha Wilson burst into the schoolhouse one afternoon, her face grave. "Abigail, come quick. There's been an accident at the Xavier Ranch. Tim's father fell from the hayloft. They've brought him to the doctor's office, but it doesn't look good." Heart racing, Abigail dismissed the children early and hurried with Martha to Dr. Wilson's small clinic. Inside, they found Zachary pacing the waiting room, his face drawn with concern. Tim sat huddled in a chair, looking smaller than his years. When he saw Abigail, Zachary's relief was palpable. "Thank God you're here. Tim needs, I don't know what to say to him." Abigail went to Tim, kneeling beside his chair. "Tim, I'm so sorry about your father. Is there anything I can do?" The boy looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. "Pa's not gonna make it, is he, Miss Novak?" The directness of the question broke her heart. "I don't know, Tim. Dr. Wilson is doing everything he can." Just then, the door to the examination room opened and Dr. Wilson emerged, his expression grave. "I've done what I can, but the internal injuries are severe. He's asking for Tim. And for you, Zachary?" Tim stood, his small shoulders squared with a courage that brought tears to Abigail's eyes. Zachary placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and together they followed the doctor. Abigail waited with Martha, the minutes stretching endlessly. When the door finally opened again, Tim emerged first, his face streaked with fresh tears. Zachary followed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "He's gone," he said simply to the Wilsons. "Peacefully at the end." The following days were a whirlwind of arrangements. Jim Garrett was buried in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town, with nearly everyone in Whisper Creek in attendance. As his only living relative, Tim was now officially an orphan, though it was understood that he would continue living at the Xavier Ranch, where he had stayed often during his father's illness. After the funeral, Abigail approached Zachary as he stood by the fresh grave. "How is Tim holding up?" "As well as can be expected. He's a strong kid, stronger than I was at his age." Zachary's voice was rough with emotion. "He keeps asking if he'll have to leave the ranch now, as if I'd let that happen." "You're taking him in permanently, of course. He's family now." The simplicity of his declaration, the absolute certainty with which he spoke, touched something deep in Abigail's heart. This was the man she had been trying to keep at arm's length, a man who, without hesitation, would take responsibility for an orphaned boy because it was the right thing to do. "You're a good man, Zachary Xavier." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a depth of feeling that took her breath away. "I try to be," he said quietly. "Some days it's harder than others." That night, alone in her room at the boarding house, Abigail made a decision. She had come west to start over, to find independence and purpose. She had found those things in her teaching, in the respect of the townspeople, in the knowledge that she could stand on her own 2 feet. But what she hadn't expected to find was someone worth sharing that new life with, someone who would strengthen her rather than diminish her. The Christmas pageant went ahead as planned the following week, a bright spot in the town's collective grief over Jim Garrett's passing. The schoolhouse was decorated with evergreen boughs and paper chains made by the children, and every seat was filled with proud parents and townspeople. Tim performed his part flawlessly, reciting a passage from A Christmas Carol with such feeling that many eyes in the audience grew damp. Throughout the performance, Abigail was aware of Zachary watching not just Tim, but her as well, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal. After the final carol, as the children dispersed to their families and the adults mingled over cups of hot cider, Abigail found herself momentarily alone by the schoolhouse door. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the black velvet sky. "It was a fine pageant, Miss Novak," came Zachary's voice behind her. "You've done wonders with these children." She turned to find him standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. "Thank you. Tim was especially good tonight." He wanted to make his father proud. Zachary stepped outside to join her. "And you too, I think. He speaks very highly of his teacher. He's a special boy." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, their breath forming white clouds in the cold air. "I've been thinking," Abigail began, gathering her courage. About what you said at the Harvest Festival, about building something real. Zachary went very still beside her. Oh, yes, and I realized something. I came west to prove I could stand on my own, and I have. But standing alone isn't the same as living alone. She turned to face him fully, looking up into his blue eyes that reflected the starlight. I was afraid, Zachary, afraid to trust again, afraid to need someone, but I'm not afraid anymore. The hope that kindled in his face gave her the courage to continue. I don't know what this is between us, but I know it's worth exploring, if you're still interested. Abigail. He spoke her name like a prayer, then reached out to take her hands in his. I've been interested since the day you arrived. That hasn't changed, even though I pushed you away. Especially because you pushed me away, it showed me you weren't making decisions lightly, that you valued yourself enough to be cautious. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I respect that, I respect you. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes, not tears of sadness this time, but of a joy so unexpected it almost hurt. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. Neither do I exactly, he said with a small smile, but I know I want to find out, together. A sudden commotion from inside the schoolhouse broke the moment someone had dropped the cider ladle, splattering several nearby parents. They both turned at the sound, then looked back at each other, laughing. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, Abigail suggested. I'd like that, Zachary offered his arm. May I walk you home, Miss Novak? You may, Mr. Xavier. They had only gone a few steps when Tim burst out of the schoolhouse, his face alight with excitement. Mr. Xavier, did you ask her yet? Did she say yes? Zachary's face flushed. Tim, remember our discussion about timing, but you said after the pageant you were gonna, Tim. Zachary's tone held a warning, though his eyes showed more embarrassment than anger. Abigail looked between them, curious. Going to what? Tim grinned, unrepentant. He's been carrying around this little box for days, practicing what to say and everything. Timothy Garrett, if you don't get back inside right now. Zachary began, but Abigail's attention was fixed on the slight bulge in Zachary's vest pocket that she hadn't noticed before. A box. Caught, Zachary sighed deeply. This was not how I planned this. He glared at Tim, who took the hint and retreated inside, though he lingered by the window, watching. Planned what exactly? Abigail's heart was suddenly racing. Zachary reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. I had a whole speech prepared, he said ruefully. About how you brought light back into my life, about how I want to build a future with you if you'll have me. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, he explained. I've been carrying it since the Harvest Festival, waiting for the right moment. Zachary, Abigail's voice caught. I know it's soon, he rushed on. And I know you came here to be independent. I'm not asking you to give that up. You can keep teaching if you want, but I'd like to ask you to consider sharing your life with me and Tim. We'd make a pretty good family, I think. Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks. You want to marry me. More than anything. His eyes held hers, sincere and vulnerable. But if you need more time, no, she interrupted. No more time. And then, seeing his face fall, she quickly added, I mean, yes. Yes, I'll marry you, Zachary Xavier. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then drew her into his arms. Nobody wants a woman like me, she whispered against his chest, voicing the fear that had haunted her since Harold's rejection. A woman with no fortune, no family connections. Zachary tilted her chin up, his eyes fierce with emotion. I've been waiting my whole life for a woman exactly like you, Abigail Novak, strong, intelligent, kind, and brave enough to forge a new path. Don't ever doubt that. And then he kissed her, there in the starlight with the sounds of celebration drifting from the schoolhouse, and Abigail knew she had found not just independence in this western town, but something far more precious, a home, a family, and a love strong enough to build a future on. They were married in the spring, when the wildflowers carpeted the hills around Whisper Creek. Abigail wore a dress of ivory silk that Martha and the other women of the town had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of the traditional orange blossoms. Zachary stood tall and proud in a new suit ordered from Denver, with Tim beaming beside him as his best man. The whole town turned out for the celebration, the same people who had once whispered about the unlikely pair now raising glasses to toast their happiness. Even Mortimer from the saloon, who still claimed Zachary's whiskey tab was unpaid, contributed a barrel of his finest for the occasion. After a brief honeymoon in Denver, Abigail's first trip away from Whisper Creek, since her arrival they returned to the Xavier Ranch, which no longer seemed in danger of failing. The spring rains had been plentiful, the cattle were thriving, and with Abigail's Eastern education and Zachary's Western know-how, they were developing new approaches to ranching that promised to weather future droughts. Abigail continued teaching, riding to town each morning on the mare Zachary had given her as a wedding gift, returning each afternoon to the home they were building together. Tim flourished under their combined care, growing into a young man who balanced book learning with practical skills, who knew both poetry and how to mend fences. And when their first child was born a year later, a son they named James, after Tim's father, their happiness seemed complete. The boy had Zachary's blue eyes and Abigail's determination, and from his first cries, it was clear he would thrive in this place where East and West had found a way to merge into something stronger than either alone. Whisper Creek continued to grow, as did the Xavier family. A daughter followed James, then another son. The school expanded, then moved to a larger building that Zachary helped design, incorporating Abigail's ideas about light and space for learning. Sometimes, on clear evenings when the day's work was done, Abigail and Zachary would sit on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple, their children playing in the yard, Tim reading a book nearby. And Abigail would remember that first day in Whisper Creek, how lost she had felt, how uncertain of her future. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary would ask, noticing her contemplative mood, and she would smile, taking his hand in hers, the pearl ring catching the last light of day. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the things we fear most change, vulnerability, needing others turn out to be the very things that save us." "Philosophical tonight, Mrs. Xavier," he would tease gently. "Just grateful," she would reply, "for this life, for you, for all of it." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Abigail knew she had found not just a place to stand on her own, but a place to belong, with a man who had indeed been waiting his whole life for a woman exactly like her.